with liberty and justice for all.
It might make more sense to do our swearing in of the new members before we do the roll call.
Yeah, we can do that. I'll invite Mr. Colbert down first.
Sure.
We're gonna swear you in.
Okay.
For the public, we have two new members, and we're just going to swear them in this evening.
All right, raise your hand and repeat after me. I do solemnly swear
I do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States,
that I will support the Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of this state,
the Constitution of this state,
the Charter of the City of Clawson,
the Charter of the City of Clawson,
and that I will faithfully perform the duties of the Office of Planning Commissioner.
and will faithfully
Perform the duties
perform the duties of the Planning Commission
in and for the City of Clawson,
in for the City of Clawson,
County of Oakland,
County of Oakland,
and State of Michigan,
and State of Michigan,
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my ability.
Thank you. Just want to sign this real quick. And Mr. Scott. We'll do the same thing.
Yeah,
Raise your hand, right hand, and repeat after me. I do solemnly swear
I do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States,
that I will support the Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of this state,
the Constitution of this state,
the Charter of the City of Clawson,
the Charter of the City of Clawson,
and that I will faithfully perform
and I will faithfully perform
the duties of the Office of Planning Commissioner
the duties of the Office of Planning Commissioner
in and for the City of Clawson,
in and for the City of Clawson,
County of Oakland,
County of Oakland,
and State of Michigan,
and State of Michigan,
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my ability.
Thank you, Nick, and welcome on board, new members. I will take roll call at this point.
I printed something, yes, last,
Mr. Fitzer,
I was fumbling.
Mr. Harrow,
Here.
Mr. Colbert,
Here.
Mr. Cusero,
Here.
Mr. Nushai, Here. Ms. Redmond,
Here.
Mr. Scott,
Here.
Mr. Sullivan,
Here.
Mr. Watson. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Agenda item number 4 is approval of this agenda, but we're going to make a change here, and we're not.
Yes, at this point, we're just going to ask for the Planning Commission to remove the site plan for 436 West 14 Mile. We're going to be working on some revised plans with the applicant and get those to you when they're completed.
Okay, so that's agenda item number 8 we're going to remove from the agenda. Anybody else have any changes they'd like to make, or?
Does it make sense to talk about it, even though we're not going to be officially reviewing the plan, or?
No, they're going to come back with different plans.
Okay.
A similar style, but enough of a difference where it's
Not worth talking about.
precisely.
Okay, so if there's no contention, I will approve this agenda as posted, removing agenda item number 8. And we'll move on to agenda item number 5, which is approval of the regular meeting minutes from February 28th, 2023, our last meeting.
Mr. Chair, I would like to move for just one amendment to the minutes with regards to the Sustainability Commission's, Commission or Committee? Yeah, Sustainability Committee's review. The meeting minutes were very thorough. Thank you for all the inclusions there, Joe. I just wanted to make one add that Mr. Scott and I had concerns about the representation from the public. It was a small sample size in that survey. And second concern was the duplicity and redundancy of it to our existing master plan. They weren't exactly in competition with each other, but it was unclear. So it doesn't change the motion. We absolutely, as a commission, adopted it at that time. We just wanted the meeting minutes to reflect those counter views.
So just some more clarity on the two of yours perspective.
Yeah, just limited involvement from the public on that.
Okay.
Would you motion to approve the minutes with that?
And I would like to make a motion to approve those minutes with those amendments, yes.
And I need-
Second.
And I have a motion, I have support. Can I have roll call, please?
Mr. Scott,
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan,
Yes.
Mr. Harrow,
Yes.
Mr. Colbert,
Yes.
Mr. Cusero,
Yes.
Mr. Nushai,
Yes.
Ms. Redmond.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Agenda item number 6 is public discussion, items not on the agenda. Is there anyone from the public wishing to speak? Please give us your name and address. And
My name's Matt Binkowski. I live at 561 Lerner, and I'm kind of confused because I watched a meeting a couple meetings ago where Mr. Colber voted for Mr. Kucera as chairman. But Mr. Colber wasn't a member. He wasn't sworn in as part of this commission, so I'm a little puzzled as to how that works. Should you go back and redo the vote? Is that vote null and void? Maybe, you can explain it to me. Thanks.
you'd have to get legal advice on that. I understand there was a slight glitch that they weren't sworn in. I wasn't aware of it at the time, but that's why I insist that they get sworn in tonight. To me, it's a minor problem. We'll have to ask our attorney what his point of view would be on that. And I'll try to get back to you. Anybody else in public? Seeing none, I will now close public discussion. We will move on to agenda item number 7, public hearing on the zoning ordinance amendment to permit medical offices in the BRD 1 district.
Evening, everybody. Yes, so this is something we talked about at a couple of meetings. And gotta go to my right file. So essentially what we discussed was that the BRD 1 district has it comes out of a past master plan, and it has an intent statement that talks rather specifically about how that district is meant to be a gateway into the community, and that small office uses are one of the major things that are called for there. And when the district was created, for whatever reason, the terminology that was put in the district talked about professional office uses, but it didn't address medical offices. Medical offices are listed separately in other districts in our ordinance from professional offices. So when you look at the ordinance as a whole, medical offices are their own thing. And if they're not listed in the BRD 1 district, then they're not permitted. However, we know that there are several in that district right now. And this amendment pretty literally adds 2 words and 1 punctuation mark, offices, comma, medical, to that district, so that those uses that are already there will not be non-conforming uses, and then other medical offices could go into that district. And that's it. That's pretty straightforward.
Joe, there's already other medical providers in that area, right?
Yeah, there's at least 2 in that district.
So this would essentially just officiate their presence there and eliminate any nonconformity from the.
That's correct. Yeah, that's the effect it would have on those existing uses.
So to the spirit of the original master plan amendment, I wasn't there for it, but was it? Well, could you think of an example of how it would be a problem? Like they cited, it's a bad gateway because of one reason or another.
No, that doesn't seem to have been part of the discussion based on going back and reading that plan and looking at the intent statement that they wound up drafting for the zoning ordinance. It really talks about small office as one of the keys to this district. So the fact that, a dentist office or an optometrist or something, those are pretty much small offices, and the fact that they can't be done there just seems like an oversight when the district was originally drafted. And we're really just trying to correct that.
Any other questions for Joe?
No, did you open public?
I will. At this point, I'll open up for public comment if the public has any comments to make. Now would be the time. Seeing none, I will then close public comment. And I guess we're going to look for a motion to approve the ordinance. Is that where we're
Motion to recommend adoption.
recommended?
by city
And to send
council.
it on to mayor and council?
That's correct.
Like a motion to that effect, if possible.
I'll make a motion to, wait, you said move it? Sorry, no, I'm like, wait.
Yeah,
move or
motion to
adopt, sorry.
recommend adoption to
Recommend
city council.
adoption of the zoning to allow medical.
Support.
And send on to mayor and council.
Sorry.
And
Oh, send on to the city council.
still support?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Sorry.
Motion support. Any further any conversation on it? Seeing none, I'll take roll call, please.
Mr. Kucera?
Yes.
Mr. Nushai?
Yes.
Ms. Redmond?
Yes.
Mr. Scott?
Yes.
Mr. Solomon?
Yes.
Mr. Harrow?
Yes.
Mr. Colbert?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. We are eliminating agenda item number 8, so we're moving on to number 9, which is a zoning ordinance discussion, short-term rentals.
Right. So this was postponed last time for a few reasons. And we had planned to reconvene tonight to continue discussing it. Mr. Nushai sends his regrets. He had planned to be here and could not be. He sent one of his colleagues in his stead. So hopefully that will help facilitate the discussion that we were looking to have. And getting to my item here. So a couple things were included in your packets. This is I guess the third time really that the existing short-term rental ordinance was included in your packet. So you have all the language of that. And we also have a memo regarding what we might do with short-term rentals in the zoning ordinance. This has been discussed with the city attorney, and Nick and I had a pretty long discussion with him yesterday about some possible approaches here, so we can get into that tonight. And but I will go through this real quickly. So our memo, just for anybody who might be watching and maybe didn't see the first two conversations we had about this, starts out by asking what prompted this discussion. So the city recently did adopt a short-term rental ordinance governing what most people would refer to as Airbnbs or VRBOs, after the two most prominent companies that enable peer-to-peer rental of dwelling units. The ordinance does define some terminology, including short-term rental itself. It requires registration and licensing of those units. It sets forth some requirements, including a maximum occupancy load, and it establishes enforcement and revocation procedures. We've been asked to look at potential zoning regulations for short-term rentals that would work hand in hand with the other ordinance. One of the things that we would do for the sake of consistency is adopt the short-term rental definition from that ordinance into the zoning ordinance, so that any time that term appears in the zoning ordinance, it would mean the same thing that it means in the general ordinance that we have. And for the sake of everyone listening, that term is defined as the word short-term rental mean any dwelling or condominium or portions thereof in which the owner does not reside that is available for use or is used for accommodations or lodging of guests, paying a fee or other compensation for a period of less than 30 consecutive days. We did provide a little bit of language for regulation of these units. And really what the draft language we provided does is it requires posting in a clearly visible location in the unit, notice or and/or copies or summaries of local ordinances. So, and it lists the ordinances on Chapter 42, nuisances, Chapter 46, Article 5, offenses against public peace and order, and Chapter 62, solid waste. It requires a reminder that they're in a residential neighborhood and neighbors might not be vacationing, and it includes a reminder that there is a local agent who can be contacted, and that local agent is established in the general ordinance that is already on the books. It also requires parking to be accommodated on site within a garage or a paved driveway, and that the owner of the unit has to demonstrate that the site can accommodate one vehicle per 3 occupants at maximum occupancy. And the ultimate effect of that is that if you can't demonstrate that, then your maximum occupancy decreases, because we can't be parking on the street or in violating other local ordinances. And then we're also referring to the general ordinance that all those rules apply. We did briefly begin to talk about districts at our last meeting, where these might be, permitted. And also we talked about aggregation standards, and really kind of where we're landing after talking is we think that one approach to the aggregation issue would be to establish a citywide cap on the number of permits that are available. And this isn't necessarily something we would do in the zoning ordinance. It's something that would be added to that general ordinance, because that's where we're requiring the licensing and registration. So
that
if you're
quite-
going to,
Is
what's
that
that?
quite standard with other cities putting a cap on it?
Yeah.
Is it standard
There are a lot of examples of that. Holland, Michigan has a cap, for instance. And there are examples from across the country.
You mean
but
by district or by citywide?
citywide?
That, I've seen it done by districts.
Yeah, you can do it by district as well. It's really a matter of how you want to proceed. But the other thing that you can do is have a spacing standard. So if you've got one of these units that needs to be licensed or registered, you can have a spacing standard, like a 500-foot radius or something, that it can't be within another unit that needs to be licensed and registered.
Just so you don't get several of them stacked up side by side.
Exactly,
right?
that's the idea there.
And is that boundary line to boundary line? How is that radius typically written?
Usually it would be written from the exterior boundaries of the property. So if you have a
lot
property
lines.
that's a square, you would take that square and you would go 500 feet out from every point on that square. It would take it basically would be a few blocks in most of the city.
Okay.
Sounds a good idea to me.
Well,
Are you still talking, Joe? Are you still going over it, or are you wanting us to comment fully here?
You can start commenting, that's fine. We can move into discussion.
Mr. Chair, I move to discuss.
Oh, nothing. Is that really a motion, or?
Well, we don't need a motion, we can just start discussing.
So, let's pull on the thread of this cap. So, let's see, me and my best friends, we own some property here, and we want to get in on the deal, and we want to have, let's just say Clausen allows 10, and we all get our 10 in. We get our foot in the door, and we're the 10 registered Airbnbers, and everybody else can't have one. Now what? What if you're one of the have-nots that wants to have one?
There actually are ways to handle that. We were looking at this. You can limit the number of units that can be operated by a single operator. So that would prohibit someone from getting all 10 units. And if you want to add anything, do feel free.
Yeah, I was just going to add that we touched on Holland just because that's an example we found that had some pretty good language on limiting that. And so for the investor-owned style, they would only allow one. So in this case, you and your friend would each only be able to own one because it's not considered a homestead property. So that's also capping the already implemented cap, if that makes sense.
Well, Nick, you bring up something interesting there, because that's the investor-owned. And we don't define investor versus
At present,
not.
we don't. That's correct.
We don't. So our current ordinance is what we're working with, right?
Correct, but what I'm saying is you could still have the cap on that you can only own one short-term rental property in Clawson.
Yeah, now, how do you alleviate double, like, people registering multiple LLCs?
When you register, you have to have, the example was there were three items to verify your occupancy at that home, something to do with driver's license. I'm sorry, I'm trying to pull it up right now.
You have to have a driver's license?
It's to verify your residency of where you
But
are.
But if they're not residents, if it's not their primary homestead, I'm confused.
Well, they would be denied then if they're trying to get two.
Well, I think where Commissioner Redmond is coming from is regardless of the cap, let's switch away from the
Right.
cap, right? Just in general, can a shell company of a shell company of a shell company have an Airbnb in Clawson?
You know, in theory, they could, but I feel like if they're going to go through that work, they're not going to set up a short-term rental monopoly in Clawson. They're probably going to go to destination communities.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and I don't know if, like, creating an LLC is not that difficult.
Right, but-
And I thought that we only had that you had to register the person that was going to be operating that as a contact. You have to do the owner and the operator then, right? Is that what you're saying?
I'm sorry, could you clarify that a little bit?
Our ordinance requires we identify the operator as well as the owner, and the owner can't be an LLC. We need to know a defined individual.
Yes, or in part of that application, they would have to designate someone within a radius, say a 30-mile radius, that's the designated responsibility for that property. So that does kind of deter the shell company item. And before we get too far, I do want to clarify, I don't not think Clawson is a destination community. I just want to clarify that. I love Clawson more than any community, but I think some communities that are waterfront see this on a more frequent basis than Clawson would. I just don't want that to come across the wrong way. I apologize.
There's a reason Holland has regulated this for 10
Yes.
years.
In Holland, I mean, Holland has some great ordinance, and I'm wondering why we picked little pieces from Holland, and I forget where the other community was that we picked a piece from, but there's a lot of great examples of ordinances with great good neighbor policy, and I know I've talked about that before, but that good neighbor policy is more than like, I don't remember reading we have a local agent to identify. Who's that? Is it the 911?
So
or
realistically, what we're trying to do right now is we kind of get the feel of the Planning Commission on short-term rentals. We're trying to get some of this on paper so you guys can review a potential draft or zoning ordinance, and that way we can move forward on some items, because we have to at some point make some groundwork on the actual ordinance we're going to be approving at some point. So we can continue discussing a lot of the stuff back and forth, but I think if we really want to start moving forward, we need consensus on, all right, we need a separation of 500 feet, 350 feet.
Well, we did give you a consensus last time. I don't think you liked the consensus last time, but we did give it to you.
Because that consensus can't necessarily happen.
Well, there is no state law that says that you can't have it in a residential area. It says that you can't zone it out if you're a city, but I don't want to misspeak, but I do believe that we spoke about looking at particular areas that we can, that are more, I don't know, more able to handle the ordinance as it's written for Airbnbs, because there are a lot of things that, from what I recall, we decided that there's a lot of things aside from just who do we call that our ordinance is missing in order to allow it in a residential neighborhood. I don't feel like that's been resolved, but
Right, so.
And I do know that, so Kara Crofton from Mr. Nushai's office is here, and there is some current legislation going through the state right now. I know she took some time to review it. If you want to maybe touch base on that a little bit too, real quick.
it's
Okay.
going through again, been resurfaced then, or?
It was passed by the House, and it's still sitting in the Senate.
Didn't it die in December? It died on the floor in December, right?
Well, I'm sorry, I'm not sure about that, but
What would die mean?
Just like, if it's not brought forward by the end of the term, it essentially is, you'd have to bring it forth again.
well, I think we can still look to that to see what the state's thinking, and likely that they'll bring something else forward.
What year was that, though? 2021?
So it was passed by the House in 2021, yeah.
Could you reference for me the resolution or the proposal?
Yeah, it's HB 4722,
Thank you.
as passed by the House.
I'm gonna try to not talk a lot, but I'm very well versed in all of those, all the proposed bills that have been brought forth, because there's been multiple. That was 2021. I know I'm not an expert in how that works and whether or not it's going to come present, but I know that cities are not beholden to a potential almost 2-year-old bill, and most cities are not following that guideline.
I understand.
That's just and I'm just saying that more so to my fellow commissioners than you. So
Yeah, I think it's probably good to take a look at it and see what it says, like I said, and just being aware that if the state does pass something, what you do here might have to be revisited. It might be null and void. We don't know. So it's just something to keep in mind, I think.
supersede, correct? Or if we passed an ordinance that was
It could
less-
become,
Yeah,
null and
then
void.
the state law would supersede our
Right.
ordinance, right?
Yeah. So, for instance, the cap is 30% in the state proposed legislation. So if you put a cap of less than 30% of residential dwellings in the city, say you pick 10%, if the state passed at 30%, then your 10% would be null and void. If that makes sense.
You would automatically go up to 30%.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
I think the state text also had no less than 2 rentals per
More.
person.
More than 2, I think you meant. No more than 2,
You
right?
couldn't say that they could have less than 2 is per person. You couldn't say 1 person, 1 rental only.
Okay, gotcha.
So, yeah, I mean, those are the main things probably pertaining to what you guys are looking at here in terms of what's in the state ordinance,
They
which
also-
again is not.
Right, and they also said that we can't zone out of residential. We have to, the proposed bill, 2-year-old bill, says
Correct,
that you
yeah.
can't make, you have to be able to see it as a residential use, essentially. Is that correct? Like, they have to
sorry.
be seen by the city as a residential use.
What do
in
you
the
mean by it
proposed
has to be
bill.
seen as?
That we can't exclude it from a residential use.
Correct, yes, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, you can't zone it out of existence.
Well, that's different than residential, but I don't want to be nitpicky. I don't want to try to be nitpicky, but it is.
It's okay.
Okay, thank you.
Just during discussion, I thought we talked about this last time. I apologize if I don't remember. What of those Airbnbs that have been up and running before this mark? Like, is there grandfathered in? Because I know that we talked about there's 3 or 4 that are in residential districts. How would we handle those, or how are they affected by whatever decisions this board makes?
Right, so everything we have right now is in R1 and R2. And if you were to
I'm sorry, where are they?
R1 and R2. And if you were to say in your zoning ordinance that this use is going to be permitted in, I don't know, CR and RM1, the ones that are in R1 and R2 would be legal nonconforming uses. So because zoning doesn't extend retroactively. So those people would have to be brought into your licensing scheme, even though they weren't, the district technically didn't allow their use. They would be operating already, so they would be allowed to continue operating. So long as they didn't cease operating for more than 6 months.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
So they basically opened up business when we had no permits or no ordinance in line.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not going to follow this. There's no inspections done for them or anything at this point?
Well, when they got their license, they would have to get into whatever inspection regime was in place. But still, they would be allowed to operate in a district where they weren't now permitted.
Right.
And that's, the same would extend to any use, as far as zoning is concerned.
Joe, I don't mean to sidetrack you, but with that comment, when you were introducing it at the beginning, you kind of talked about, I still don't, anyway, I guess my question is, when this is in our ordinance, is it going to have a component of inspection attached right to the ordinance? Because every time I bring it up, I don't see the inspection part, but I know that there's an inspection component, but it's not something we've touched on so much.
Right. That's not something we do through zoning. That's something that would have to be done through an general ordinance. So the actual short-term rental unit ordinance or a related ordinance would have to actually establish that inspection procedure. So I guess that's something to talk about here, is that we have a general ordinance that we're trying to craft a little bit of zoning language to go with. And the general ordinance does a lot of the heavy lifting. And a lot of the things that we might talk about here actually are things that ultimately would go into the general ordinance if it were to be amended. So I think we maybe have to ultimately have here's the stuff we want to do in zoning, and here's the things that we would like to recommend that aren't zoning. And that could be a communication from the planning commission that goes with the zoning amendments that we adopt. And then obviously it's up to city council at that point whether they want to do anything with those recommendations. But it's something that the planning commission could do as an advisory communication.
So would we be able to break it down into like, let's say, and I'm only saying this, I'm not trying to push it on you guys, but I thought that there was a kind of a consensus of, like, nobody wanted to talk about residential. But would it be worthwhile to discuss what missing components are, what components might be missing in order for us to make it feel comfortable in a residential area with a cap or with a radius separation? Would that make sense, Joe? I didn't know that we were gonna do that in a way of giving feedback. Like, well, if we want to do residential, here are some things that we would think would be best for protecting, the health, safety, welfare of the citizens, kind of thing.
So, yes, you can potentially come up with a list of things that you think is missing. And what our job would be after we had that list would be to say, all right, from this list, this is what could go in zoning, and this is what would be better served in a general ordinance. And anything that fit in zoning, we would draft language for that, and you would ultimately set a hearing on it and adopt it. And anything that didn't fit in zoning that had to be in the other ordinance would go into an advisory communication to council. And then council can, again, do with that as they will.
Mr. Chair, I wonder if it's okay if we go by, with topic by topic and to see if we agree on things, not vote on things, but agree on this to give them some direction to come next time. For example, I see the zoning, we have 7 zonings here, R1, R2, RM1, RM2, CRCC, CMD. And on this one, it says, on RM2, only property on the City of Clawson Manor Senior Tower. We do not recommend permitting short. We agree that we shouldn't have that.
Right, we scratched that one out, yeah.
Right.
So that's something
Right.
that we all agree. Can we go and do this for all of them and possibly continue that with aggregation and with, to give them some numbers, and they can come back and tell us, well, that the distance from one rental to the other, 300 feet, for example, doesn't work. So they tell us if it's 500 feet will work, or 200 feet will work. So maybe let's do something like that, and all of us in agreement, and then next time we
Right,
go
that's-
into a more official way,
Right,
if you
that's
will.
what we're doing here. We're looking for discussion,
I think
obviously.
that would be useful.
That,
yeah.
I think that's an organized way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just caution, though, cart getting ahead of.
I'm sorry?
Just a caution, though, the cart getting a little bit ahead of the horse in the sense that it's still ambiguous to me why we're even talking about this.
What do you mean?
No person has come to me and said, get on short-term rental ordinances and planning. I'm aware that the city attorney, your brother, came to council and said, you must do this, and they did. They agreed to do it, and it's
Our
here.
council brought this up, not the city attorney, by the way.
I don't think
They
that's true.
wanted this.
No, I don't think it's true. It was approached, I asked in this very meeting, who is pushing for this? It was used, using the term we. We thought you should do this, we think you should do this. You're saying right now, we think you should do this. We need clarity, we should be doing this, and I'm aware of this. But
We
I've kept
currently
asking.
have rentals there that are not registered, short-term rentals right now. So we obviously need some ordinance. We don't have an ordinance to govern those.
Correct, but but why is it a problem now? Yes, you're right, it exists now, it can exist now. I don't actually know of one, but it can
A
exist right
lady
now.
came here and spoke about it, that she owned a property, then rented out on
That
Airbnb.
was a different case, so she was living in the house and renting out an area
Right.
of it. It's not the same as what we're fighting.
I understand. but
she
these
was
things
renting
do
a room
exist
in her
our
house.
city. That's what I'm
Right,
trying
and
to
it's
say.
best to have it regulated. I think is what he's saying, like, we could have, if we want to put our head in the sand about, especially residential, we could essentially have a lot of them without any ordinance to regulate. So I do think it's important, and I think the bill is the thing that brought it to our attorney's attention, is that at that time, the bill was going through. I don't want to speak for him, but I attended a lot of the council meetings during that time. So he was like, this is coming through. And
But
I
if I
know that he
understand-
tries to stand
Yeah,
on
we're trying
that.
to get ahead of a perceived problem here.
I hear you, but if I understand correctly, the bill didn't pass the House. And if we put money through our attorneys into developing this, we may have to just redo it all over again later once that has happened. So we'll end up paying for it twice. I get it if it's necessary. If there's public outcry that we need it now, so be it. I've not heard that public outcry. I have heard public outcry, we should be planning about our city's infrastructure. But we're not talking about that right now because we're talking about this. So if you want to add dimensions and framework to a solution to a potential problem that could exist someday, I'm willing to have that conversation. But I don't understand why we're having it specifically now. And I would definitely not like to even discuss this until we have further public opinion, comment from residents. Because your statement that we have to legislate, we have to get in front of this, we have to start managing this and
I said
governing
that?
it. I thought you did.
No, I said I interpreted, and I never said have to. I said, I think that what he said was he was trying to get ahead of the legislation and let us know what was coming.
Yeah. But
Or are you referring to me saying that right now we could have 90% of our residentials as Airbnbs without any regulation? I'm not sure which.
I think it's more to the latter, yeah.
Okay.
You were concerned a lack of regulation would do harm to the residencies.
There's a possibility,
Yeah,
for
Right,
sure.
good.
And it could. It hasn't up to this point, so far as I know. It could have. But if it did, residents would come up here and say, hey, I'm tired of these parties next door by these people that come every day and so forth. So I am not in favor of it. I am very concerned about
We did receive
short-term
emails,
rentals.
to be fair, from residents that are next to Airbnbs that did have concerns and objections to them.
Okay.
I
I've
do
never
believe.
seen that. I know that council was made aware of it, that there were some residential complaints
I
against them.
thought that maybe I'll have to look back.
Just to add a point, and Nick, you could definitely speak after. I apologize for cutting you off.
No, you're good.
Having not been exposed, I would love to see any information that council used to make their recommendation on the ordinance. And I apologize if it's because I'm new and maybe wasn't as involved as say Ms. Redmond was, during those conversations. But I feel ill-prepared. And to Ms. Nahar's point, I don't feel confident making decisions exactly on where this should be happening and how much aggregation there should be and how far apart they need to be without some information for next time. So I know we're not making decisions today. I just asked maybe for next time in the packet, if there's anything that could be included, especially if there was any input from the Clawson citizens. I mean, that would be super helpful for me to feel a little more prepared to make decisions. And I'm happy we're having this discussion. And I do see that there's need to at least start the discussions, and I just want to feel like I have some ammo. That's all.
If I could build upon that, some feedback perhaps from the city police. They're ultimately going to be the ones that are getting phone calls to show up and deal with some of these problems. I'd like to hear what they have to say about the preparation for that. Does that need to be budgeted? Are there going to be additional costs with that when we perhaps start mandating inspections and they go south, or we have parties regardless of whether they follow the framework or not, and they have to get involved? It'd be neat to get some feedback from them as well before we get too deep into the line item by line item. I appreciate what you're trying to do, and let's get some specificity here so we can start talking in dimensional terms. But it's so vague and it's so
Can I
inorganic.
interject here?
I'm done.
The city council did pass the ordinance, just so you know.
I'm
So
aware.
right now, it's essentially allowed in any zone.
Right.
Excuse me. But, so like, it's not like, are we gonna allow it or not? It's already allowed. So I'm not really sure, like, that's why we're here.
I just feel like
That's the next step.
I'm just, my own understanding is, it is, because I've kind of just monitored Airbnb, and I haven't seen growth in the number of Airbnbs or VRBOs in the area. So I know that we need to be smart and get ahead of it. I don't know that there is a burning desire, and this is going to get out of hand if we don't. So I'm just trying to understand kind of all the facts before, and Nick, I know you want to maybe speak on that too.
Maybe I want to build on your comments, and maybe we should invite over council here, or members of council, whoever is going to show up, to talk to us about what brought this up and why is this important to them that they voted on it. And maybe we should invite the chief of police or one of the detectives to talk about it as well. And then maybe we should do that, and with your permission, or if you can, please, to direct their
Certainly, I
attention.
mean, that's all we're doing this evening. We're just having a discussion here. We're not
Right,
going to
right,
be
right.
passing ordinance or anything tonight.
Obviously not. I'm saying for next meeting, if we can invite those interest parties over
Right.
so they can speak on their behalf
Yeah,
for
I
this.
think the overall discussion, I think, is helpful to administration here, because now they're understanding where we're coming from, what we're looking for.
Obviously. But I've heard these comments more than one time, so maybe we should invite them.
Right.
So we can hear from them.
Is that a motion? Do we have to make a motion for that?
I don't know.
No, I think
Just
we
the chair
just
can-
direct administration
Can
to,
we can just do it? Okay.
they're looking for discussion ideas, and that's what we're giving them right now, so I don't think there's any motion involved. Like you said that, and I saw it at the council, that they said they had complaints by residents living next to Airbnbs, but I never saw any paperwork from them. I never saw any
And
documentation.
maybe
on it.
I'm mixing up that it came to planning commission, so I'm sorry if I misstated that. I didn't mean that I got an email and nobody else did or anything like that, but I want to say, and it could have been, sometimes I'm vocal on Facebook and stuff, so it could have been residents that have replied or,
Some complaints like that directed to council, I can see what would spur them on to do something, to
Right.
act,
For
take
sure.
action.
Right.
yeah.
But I'm not aware of what was actually involved. I'm not sure why they made the decision they made. You know.
Yeah, and they didn't have the zoning component, right? They were just
Right.
like, we can't, that's an overreach, so they count on us to step in and pull our side of things forward, at least to my understanding. But I support the ideas of
My
having
version is,
discussions.
it came up in council, it was kind of, they were deer in the headlights, like, where's this coming from? And they said, well, we're fine to kick you off, but go to planning and figure out the specifics of it.
Yeah, to hurry up, get an ordinance in place now, and then bounce it off planning to
Right.
tweak it
zoning,
out.
yeah.
So it was set up in that way. I still don't understand exactly what was the pressing desire, so.
Well, I mean, what are our pressing desires for like tree ordinance or sign ordinances? And, I mean, like, obviously, we want to have ordinances in place, but we work differently than, like, the city council, right? Where we're like, sometimes the back end, we find things to clean up. Joe's great at that, you know? It's, so I don't see any issue.
So the original point with that ordinance was to be proactive and to ensure that future short-term rental properties have to register regardless of where they are. So if we waited on any ordinance, we could have, say we didn't have passed anything back in 2022 in December. we could have, say, 30 or 40 that if we did have an ordinance, those would then be non-conforming in residential districts. And so now we're at least building a registration pool and have contacts, addresses, et cetera. So that is part of the reason why it started from the get-go. And I think the point was to have something in place and build off of something rather than nothing, and just wait for the state to obviously take their time to get something books. And they did bring that up end of last year. It's been in a couple of different committees. So
And I think the ordinance is great. I mean, I think it's important to know and have some oversight over what's going on. I just don't have the information at hand to say, I feel like we have to zone out of all residential, or we only want to put it in.
Right, because the
CR.
numbers
You
would
know,
be
I just-
arbitrary, I
I
agree.
feel like I would be making a decision without information. and
Right.
That's not right.
So,
So, yeah.
yeah,
figure out a
if
way.
we may maybe get a more specific list together, and we'll kind of just go through a couple of the items. That way, we're not assuming what you guys mean. So, you know, for example, Mr. Harris said he would like some specific feedback from police and whether or not it would essentially affect their operations, correct?
If they had any complaints, I assume, right?
Right.
For neighborhood.
concerns.
Right. And I mean, I can probably speak on that. I don't think it has affected anything more than just another.
Any other call.
Precisely. You know, they're always going to have a couple officers on shift ready to go at any call that comes through. But it's definitely something we can invite to get some feedback on.
It'd be interesting to know what the public that is next door, the residents that are next door to one of these now, what their complaints are, whether council wants to share that with us or not. Is it noise levels, is it light levels, parking levels? What is the problems that are existing now? So it's a discussion tonight, and I think, I don't know how far we want to go with this.
Are you going to invite the police chief here, or are you in city council as suggested, or are you saying that you're gonna go with some questions to them and report back?
Well, it sounds like the consensus was to have them actually attend the meeting.
Oh, okay, I wasn't
Is that
sure.
correct? Did I?
If possible.
Yes.
If possible.
That'd be the preference,
Yes.
yeah.
Please,
Okay.
for me at least.
Yeah. Is it also possible to request some research items? So I don't know exactly how this works. I don't want to write a check I can't cash, but I do have some legal questions as it pertains to how these ordinances are drafted or written in other cities, like you mentioned Holland, for example. So let's use Holland as a fictitious example. So I mentioned that I'm concerned about property owners establishing Airbnbs that they aren't actively managing themselves. So there's a value to the landlord being in Clawson to be accountable for what's going on there and being interested and involved versus being in the Bahamas. I've heard two arguments to this, so you could never do that, maybe. But I know of some cities that seem to have pulled it off, not necessarily Michigan. So I'd like to know what legal controls can prevent excessive distance to the person accountable for that property. So I use the example of like multiple shell companies between the city and them. So that'd be an interesting question to ask. Minimum stays is another one. If you could research that, is there precedents established for minimum stays? There are hotels in Southeast Asia that I stayed at for business that you could rent for the night, and then there were other hotels that I didn't stay at that you could rent by the hour, and I didn't think that was good. So minimum stays are an interesting question for me.
Well, I don't think Airbnb or Vrbo let you rent for less than one night, so I think that's going to be null and void from the get-go.
Not, but even more than one night, you know.
Might get more of a draw for Clausen.
I don't know.
You just gave
Gonna
them an
go back to the
idea now.
destination item.
It's a destination we don't want to be, guys. So
I think that is outlawed in the city.
I hope so. Yeah.
The
So
heart will
real
become much bigger.
quick, if I may,
Sure.
I know Mr. Sullivan said he's checked out the Airbnb and Vrbo websites. I don't know if anyone has had the chance to look at those. If you look at some of those photos, I mean, those houses are upkept very well in comparison to some. And so I think it's a marketing tool for them. They don't want their home to have a bad front porch, overgrown grass. And so I mean, you could make the argument that they are more apt to take better care of that home on the external part of the property compared to another property in Clawson.
Absolutely. I don't,
That's not always the case though. Maybe in Clawson, but like literally, I was just in Royal Oak today. A woman was talking about the Airbnb next door in Royal Oak, who the sub pump's been running for months, and the yard's flooded, and she's tried to contact them, and but it's not always the case. There are slumlord Airbnb hosts that are like, I'll just be the cheap guy, and people will show up and complain later. So I don't think that we can count on them in their marketing to sustain a certain level of performance. I just don't think we can count on that.
agreed.
Yeah.
And I'm not even assuming that everybody who participates in this ordinance is necessarily going to be an Airbnb host, right? It is entirely possible that someone would rent their home for short periods of time outside of that process or that company. I'm actually much more concerned about that case than I am what you're talking about. You're right. I mean, they have ratings. I think the person who came in and advertised, she was a super host, if I got that right. I'm not worried as much about that as I am, mass investors, selling places by the night, because that's all people can afford for that particular day. And that's a transient nightmare for Clawson, so. Okay, I'm going to repeat it. So shell company prevention, minimum stays. We've talked a little bit already about inspection standards. Can they come in? Can they not come in? So legally, I'm interested, what are the current accepted practices for what is commonly allowed? We could probably go outside of that and get a little aggressive and say, we can come in at 3 o'clock in the morning and, knock on your door. I'm not saying that we do. I'm just asking, what are the guidelines currently? And penalties. If we catch a landlord not doing their part, what penalties and controls does the city potentially have to levy? And last one is marijuana use on site. I just am curious. I'm aware of the recreational laws on that. I'm curious if as a non-homestead, is there additional controls that could be put in place that prevent a neighbor who's not accustomed to having that smell coming over their fence line suddenly having it?
So regarding inspection standards, right now, we only do for outside of the home, so exterior inspections. So, that's just a simple drive-by by a code enforcement officer, police officer, any other staff member for that matter. Penalties, those would.
If I may, not to interrupt you, but it doesn't have to be reported now. These are things,
Okay.
Take a lot of time, maybe.
No, that's what's in the ordinance he's telling you right now.
Yeah.
You want to know how far we can go, though?
Yes. Further. Yeah.
So to go further into inspections, is that what you mean? So are you implying that you'd be interested in doing interior inspections? Because there would be some significant resources needed to be allocated to that. I'm not saying it's not an option, just giving that background to you.
Yeah, so an example of feedback at the next meeting, or if it's 2 meetings from now, or if it's 3 meetings from now, from you and the city attorney and whatever, is be like, yeah, this is the can of worms you're talking about. We would need to, have a conversation about resources, but for legally speaking, here is an example of the ordinance that Holland, thank you, has in place right now and presumably hasn't been sued over. So that, we could be researching these in actual examples of it. And I'd like to do that in addition to the public comment and feedback from the police, both of those things before I consider myself educated enough to really talk about it.
Okay.
So thank you for that.
If I could follow up on that, I think the last meeting I mentioned, the liability that Clawson may have. We're providing a license to for someone to do this, but we haven't necessarily confirmed that there's smoke detectors in the house, that the electrical is appropriate. What kind of liability does that put Clawson under? Right.
Yeah, because it's not really considered a house anymore. Now it's a business.
Right.
That they're running out of. And I agree that in all businesses, we do internal inspection. It's going to cause a lot more work for the city, though, to do an internal inspection. But I agree with you. To me, it's a commercial venture. It's not just a house that you're renting out. I don't think that we can hold the owner of the property liable. Somebody catches on fire, somebody hurts themselves seriously in the house, it's up to, does he have the insurance on it, or should we prevent the problem before it occurs?
Right, and
Just-
is that even include, I don't think that that's included in
So-
our ordinance. That's one of the
No,
things, is
no,
like
we-
making sure they have a certain level of license.
Compliance to building code, right,
we
is essentially
do
what you're
was-
touching on.
Exactly.
We do.
Well,
as
is that
exists.
required under building code? Is a certain level of license, like, or not license, I'm sorry, but insurance? And I don't know what type, would they get renter's insurance on their home? I don't know.
I can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah.
So Airbnb, I don't know about VRBO, has what they call air cover, so that the host pays a portion of what do they get from the renter goes to Airbnb, obviously, for connecting them, but also for air cover, which is their insurance. So just wanted to call that out because I know
But does that cover everything and it's mandatory?
it's mandatory because you pay the fee. But I had asked this question about a place up north and renters insurance. I mean, it could be a rider. You can't really have renters insurance, but Airbnb's coverage is supposed to be enough to. I think they're through Liberty Mutual or something like that. So
But
there's
they
some
cover
information on
fire,
Airbnb.
water, all those things?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the big ones are covered. So
Oh, okay.
you can
That's
research it on
helpful.
Airbnb.
Is that damage to the house, though, or is
Damage to
that-
the house.
Right.
If it-
But the renter getting injured because the house was not up to code because of.
Yeah, I would not
fire.
know exactly. I wouldn't
Yeah,
want to speak on that.
yeah,
But that's a
yeah.
good point.
That's what I'm concerned about, you know.
We'd have to double check, but there's some information online, so I'll check out.
All right, I think we have some good notes. Is there anything else that anyone would want to add on this?
One more thing, you mentioned inviting the public. How can we do that in an efficient way? Because we always do invite them, and obviously. So is there a mechanism that we can trigger? Because this is important, obviously. I would love to see people here talk about it.
We could do some more social media presence. We could have some flyers up at some frequently stopped at locations in Clawson Library, Hunter Community Center, et cetera, to try and elicit some more feedback and maybe do something else outside of a regular Tuesday night evening.
Right.
So
If you can advertise as council members will be here, I think that will,
we can see.
They always put out a good show, right?
I think they're popular, more popular than us, right? They got some votes.
Do we have anybody on the registry already? Do you know?
At this point, no.
Okay.
I was going to ask too, what about like a free survey, like Survey Monkey or something like that? Is that reasonable? People don't want to come in and waste, like, not waste their time, but, after work and they have their kids and dinner and plans and is there a way to solicit feedback through a free survey instrument?
We could probably do that. I mean, we'd have to figure out the details as part of that survey. I mean, it would just be a simple. Do you support?
5-question survey at most or something like that, with an open verbatim to be able to add
Gotcha.
comments. I don't know, just something to think about to get more feedback.
Right.
Than just the 2 or 3 that are very strongly opinionated and came in and took their time, right? To
Precisely.
get a better view of the normal person in the city.
Well, I guess, what do we want, what kind of feedback? I would hate for you to go about getting a survey and then us be like, well, what about this question? You didn't ask this question. Like, is there a certain criteria that we want to kind of put forth in helping us form our opinion on the survey?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, and I would open to all feedback, obviously there, including, the administration, but I definitely would, there's scales and things that we can use on level of comfort, and there's open verbatim, which I think would be really interesting, just like an open comment box to be able to say what concerns you have, where we can just do some quick text analytics and be able to say, the biggest concern is noise, or the biggest concern is liability. Just to get some understanding of and I don't know if this has happened before the ordinance was developed,
No.
Okay,
There's no survey.
It wasn't.
I'm just saying,
No, it's
looking for
helpful.
more
I think it's
information, right?
great.
It's just like.
Yeah, I didn't know if you wanted to be as specific as like, how do you feel about it if we're gonna talk about
By
just
name,
zoning
yeah.
and our portion of it, or if we want to talk about
I think
other
that's,
parts?
I mean, our main objective is around zoning, but there's recommendations for expanding our current ordinance, so we could do both. There could be optional questions at the end for additional ordinance.
You won't see a survey tomorrow, so
Yeah. And Nick, I'm happy to help you with it.
I imagine we'll probably down the road work on that, and I think I've got a decent idea of what type of content you're looking for. Obviously, some open-ended options, like you were saying, but yeah, I think this is absolutely something we can do.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, and just real quick, I don't know if we'll be able to get this on the next agenda. I think next agenda, we have a couple other items. The CIP is either going to be next Tuesday or the following Tuesday. I guess meeting-wise for you guys, I should say. So,
CIP again?
yeah, it has to, it's updated every year.
Did we start in March last year?
No, but we're on the ball this year.
Oh, okay. I was like, I feel like we
Oh,
just
come on.
ended it. Like, is it a whole year of
We're ahead of the game.
That's cool. That's great.
Who would've thought?
It's still fresh in our minds too, right?
Yeah,
So that's
last
good.
year was the first time we did it. We got a late start on it.
Yeah, so we'll get that in front of you. I'm thinking it's the April 11th meeting. Forgive me if the date's not spot on, but we're looking at that. So we've got a couple of other items looming, so I'm not sure the timeline for this, but we've got a good list of things to go over, so
Okay.
I'm sure we'll be back with you guys shortly.
Thanks. Joe, do you have anything more on the short-term rentals, or are you satisfied with?
No, I think I'm satisfied at this point.
Okay, we'll take care of that. We'll move on to agenda item number 10, other business. Anybody have any other business going on?
Can I be just, can I just ask if they decide on future plans in the future that they're not going to go through or we're not going to see them, I know it's probably hard to do, but if you could let us know as soon as possible. I waste so much paper printing these things out and spend a lot of time going through them, and I'm sure everybody does. And I'm not like upset or blaming anybody, but like I have no idea. They could have told you this morning, right? But as soon as possible, it'd be really great because I know that sometimes, yeah, you know.
Well, do you mean when
six-
things are pulled out of the agenda?
pulled out of the agenda, especially like plans that have, 50 pages or whatever. It would be great to kind of just let us know as soon as possible, even if it's like 6:59, that's okay, because I might still be writing last minute notes. But that's my only thing.
Good point. Yeah, I didn't know it until this afternoon sometime. It was pulled off.
Yeah,
It happened, so.
it is, and I know you can only help so much.
I knew it was
so.
good as of Friday. Mr. Chair, my point, I'll be attending for the first time the ZBA this Thursday. There's 2 items on the agenda. I just wanted to make awareness, nothing needed from any of the commissioners, but just for your awareness, 650 North Rochester is coming up for an opportunity with perhaps another business, an automotive repair shop. So they're looking for some.
That was the
Tire
tire
shop?
the
Tire
tire
shop.
shop that
Yep.
we approved with the marijuana thing that fell through.
That fell through.
Yep.
So someone else is coming back with something else now.
Yep, and then I believe on Red Roof, there's an addition coming up there with a very, very small setback interference. So those at least are the current ones on the agenda. So I just want to make awareness to that. It's going to happen. And I will be your liaison to that meeting. So that's all I have.
Good, thank you for doing that. Under other business, as we're talking about agenda, I still am very disappointed that Dee Dee's is not on the agenda, as it's been promised several times. I'm sure everybody's getting tired of talking about it. Is the city still in contact with the company? Is something going on?
We've been in contact the entire time, and we are still reviewing, yes.
Okay, because from my position, I think that the building department that issued the temporary, which is now expired, should be pushing it back to us. I think there should be a show cause to come back here to explain to us what's going on.
Once that review is complete, we'll figure out what we have to do, and when we have that decision, we'll let you know.
Okay, I'll hold my breath then.
I think on that topic, though, Mr. Chair, the concern we have again is not Dee Dee's. I think Dee Dee's
Yeah,
a
it's not a
very
personal thing,
good-looking
no.
business. It's just the process right now. We're uncomfortable with, any number, but especially a multitude of TCOs operating outside there without our knowledge. So it's a bypass of the site review plan process that we'll just never know. So I don't know if you're prepared to talk about it today, Nick, but if there is a comprehensive list of what active temporary occupancy permits are outstanding there right now. I know there's at least one because it's DD's, but how many other ones are there? I think we need to have some grasp on. So if you could, please, help us understand those as soon as possible, it would be appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just not something I'm prepared to talk about right now. So I just don't have the complete knowledge list documentation.
Yeah, and just a number. Don't even need no names, just the number, just so we can have some gravity of how much to focus on it and how much not to. And the answer might be you don't know, and that's a fair answer. You've not been in a position very long, and I totally think that's a reasonable answer too. There's just, between COVID and all these other things that have happened to the city, like I think it's better to be honest about the situation, and if we need to make some, awareness to it or get additional resources, whatever the situation is right now. But I don't think the solution is a lot of businesses are operating outside of site plan commitments because we just don't have the bandwidth to manage it. Like, I don't think that's the answer either, so. And forgive me for implying that is the case. I don't know that it is.
No, I mean, to answer your question, we don't have many businesses operating like that whatsoever. And if we did, that would obviously be a problem. But no, I mean, it's not like we've got 10 or 15 businesses operating without the confines of their site plan. So do I have an exact number? No, but I can tell you it's not an alarming number by any means.
Yeah, when Joan was wearing that hat and doing it, she would give us at least a once a monthly report on what's going on around town as to what's outstanding, what's going to be done, what's not done, like the progress on the Church of Claus and how they're coming along.
Yeah, and I
companies
did
coming in, companies going out.
And I did have something started, and I'm going to be building on from that. It was the last document in the report. And again, like you said, I'm starting a little bit fresh, so I'll be building on this document for you guys. And like I said previously, the first meeting of the month is my goal to have it in front of you. And then depending on work, we'll see if we have to do it for both meetings.
It just becomes a little surprising to us when people on Facebook are telling us what's going on around town. Like I wasn't aware that Burger King's coming down until I saw it posted.
Well, they had their demo permit pulled last Thursday pretty late, and the fence went up. And to answer that question, no, they have not submitted any plans. So
Okay.
Everything is strictly speculation right now. So.
Hey, Nick, did you already talk about what type of review you're going through with DDs? Is that something that you've already kind of discussed?
I think we've mentioned it a couple times, but it's an
Oh.
administrative review by the city manager and the city attorney.
Of their actual site plans?
Of that, along with communication back and forth.
So you're talking about like a legal type of review or like not like a site plan certificate of occupancy review? Like, will it ultimately end in granting them another C of O? Or like, what's the end process of that review? Or is there not a determination?
I'm
on
not
where that
prepared to
ends?
answer that.
Okay.
And I simply just don't have that to
Okay.
give you guys at the
I
moment.
just thought it might be helpful for us, so we know what to look for.
I mean, the goal is obviously to get them in compliance and get them a certificate of occupancy. But I think the process there is we're still trying to figure that out.
Gotcha, thanks.
Okay, anything else for other business? Let's move on to the planner's report.
I didn't really have anything else. I just hadn't been at the mic as much as usual, so I just figured I'd come up here. But yeah, I didn't have anything in particular.
Okay, then we'll move on to staff report and training opportunities, which we've got a few of those on emails.
And I apologize for being at the mic more. So just to continue the conversation that we were having a minute ago, I've said this multiple times, and I'll continue to sharing it with everyone about the Michigan State Citizen Planner course. I know we have 2 commissioners that are interested, and I'll be registering this week. And I'm really tempted to have everyone registered to partake in that course, as I believe it'll be extremely beneficial for your guys' understanding. Is there objection from anyone for getting signed up and completing that course? No? Okay.
You talking
Then-
about the in-person or remote?
Remote, ideally, I believe that's the preference. I know
Yeah.
you guys are all working and have your own life to deal with, and I think the ability to do it at your own time is very convenient.
Wait, is that the one I'm already signed up for?
Yes, you were on
Oh,
the
okay.
virtual option, and
Yeah.
they just recently
Yeah.
started marketing the in-person.
Oh, okay. I just want to make sure I already.
Yes, you-
I want to make sure you're not signing me up for something else.
No,
Okay,
no.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have, Mr. Fitzer has it completed. You and Mr. Hara are enrolled, and then Mr. Solomon and Mr. Scott have shown interest already previously. And so unless there's objection from the other people not enrolled,
How
we'll
many
probably get
hours do we
everyone
think
enrolled.
this is all in? Have you taken it? or-
Roughly
Depends on if you use
Probably
your phone.
12 to 15 hours, I believe.
Start to finish, all of it?
Yes. Well, I mean, it depends on how fast you go through.
Okay.
It's a little tedious, but it's very informational.
It's very informational and very
Nick
important
loves
because
it,
it's.
so I'm not gonna say anything
I'm jacked
bad.
up about education, so
I love education, but that, you have to click. You have to be, it's not like you can turn it on.
it's not a
and-
video and go, mow the lawn
You
or
can't take-
vacuum. So
I was taking notes while doing it, but yeah, you have to click buttons the whole time.
Once you're on, and,
Yeah, it's good times.
but you can stop and go back at it.
You can. yeah.
it's very user friendly in the fact you can start a module and go do whatever else for a few minutes and come back and leave right off.
Okay.
So by the end of this week, I will be having all of you registered. I'll get all the login information for all of you guys. And then, obviously, as you guys move through that course, if you have questions, comments, issues, please don't hesitate to reach out. There's a couple other opportunities in here just on general the local government law. I thought that was interesting, so I want to share it with you guys. And then on that second page is where some more of those development updates, et cetera, will be in. And as I shared, that'll be a growing document as I get more comfortable with how some of the things operate over there. So, does anyone have any questions?
I think we're all good.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Agenda item number 13 is legal update.
Nothing further tonight from the city attorney.
That's it. Thank you. If no one has any comments, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion second, roll call, please.
All right. Mr. Scott?
Yes.
Mr. Hara?
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan?
Yes.
Ms. Redmond?
Yes.
Mr. Nushai?
Yes.
Mr. Kucera?
Yes.
And Mr. Colburn?
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you, everyone.